The freezing water didn't kill me the first time. The betrayal did. I spent my last breath coughing up pink froth in a sterile hospital room, listening to the heart monitor flatline while my fiancé kissed his mistress in the hallway. Then I closed my eyes and woke up standing on the edge of the exact same icy lake 3 years earlier. He was pointing at the cracked ice, demanding I prove my loyalty. This time I just smiled, turned my back, and left them out in the cold. The wind coming off Lake Mercer tasted like copper and pine. It bit at my exposed cheeks, stinging with a sharpness I hadn't felt in years. I shouldn't be feeling it. I should be dead. Seconds ago, I was drowning in the fluid of my own ruined lungs. I remembered the harsh fluorescent lights of the ICU. I remembered the smell of bleach and the pathetic hollow rattle of my final breath. I remembered the shadow of Declan's head tilting toward Fiona's just outside my hospital room window, their silhouettes merging into one, while my vision faded to black. Now, I was staring at the heavy wool of Declan's winter coat. "I'm not asking for a miracle, Nora," Declan said. His voice was laced with that familiar, patronizing impatience. "It's my grandmother's ring. Fiona bumped my arm. It was an accident. But the ice is too thin for me. I weigh 200 pounds. You barely weigh 120. If you crawl out on your stomach, the weight distribution will hold." I blinked. The snow crunched beneath my leather boots. My toes were freezing. My lungs, my beautiful, healthy, unscarred lungs, expanded, pulling in massive, greedy drags of the frigid air. It didn't hurt. There was no wheezing, no blood. I looked to my left. Fiona was huddled in her oversized white faux fur jacket, shivering with theatrical exaggeration. Her wide, doe-like eyes looked at me from beneath a knitted beanie. "I feel just awful, Nora," Fiona whispered, wrapping her arms around herself. "I'm so clumsy. I know how much that ring means to Declan's family. If I wasn't so terrified of the water, I'd go get it myself. In my past life, I believed her. In my past life, I was terrified of losing Declan, terrified that his wealthy, snobbish family would finally have an excuse to cut me out if I lost their precious heirloom. So like a desperate, pathetic fool, I got down on my hands and knees. I crawled onto the groaning black ice. I reached for the silver band resting right near a jagged fracture, and the ice broke. I plunged into water so cold it felt like being crushed in a vice. I was in there for 10 minutes before a park ranger pulled me out. Declan hadn't even gotten his boots wet. The hypothermia triggered severe pneumonia, which permanently scarred my lungs, turning the last 3 years of my life into a breathless, wheezing nightmare. And the punchline, the ring I almost died for, was a cubic zirconia fake. The real heirloom was already tucked securely into the pocket of Fiona's faux fur coat. I only found that out on my deathbed. "Nora, are you deaf?" Declan snapped, stepping closer. He gripped my shoulder. His fingers dug into my collarbone. "It's right there. Just go get it. Stop being so dramatic." I looked down at the ring, resting on the dark, treacherous ice. Then I looked at his hand on my shoulder. "Take your hand off me," I said. My voice sounded strange to my own ears. It wasn't the desperate pleading pitch of the woman I used to be. It was flat, dead. Declan frowned, his handsome face twisting in confusion. "Excuse me." "You heard me." I knocked his hand away. He stumbled back half a step, more from shock than physical force. I turned to look at Fiona. Her fake shivering stopped. "And you, if you feel so awful, go fetch it yourself like a good dog. Or leave it. I don't care." Declan's jaw dropped. Nora, what the hell is wrong with you? That is my grandmother's ring. No, it isn't, I said, zipping up my coat. It's a $20 replica. You bought at a pawn shop on 4th Street to stage this little loyalty test. The real one is in Fiona's right pocket. The color completely drained from Fiona's face. She looked like she had just been slapped. Her hand instinctively twitched toward her right pocket before she stopped herself, her eyes darting to Declan in sheer panic. Declan froze. The authoritative anger melted off his face, replaced by a dumb, slack-jawed stutter. How? What are you talking about, Nora? You're acting crazy. Crazy. I let out a short, dry laugh. The sound hung in the frozen air. Crazy is expecting your fiancé to risk drowning in a frozen lake for a piece of cheap metal while you stand safely on the shore with the woman you're sleeping with. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. Crying was for people who still had hope. All I had left was a cold, hard knot of disgust sitting heavy in my stomach. I turned my back on them and started walking toward the parking lot. Nora. Declan barked, his voice cracking. He sounded desperate, now the illusion of control slipping. Nora, if you walk away right now, we are done. Do you hear me? We're done. I didn't even look back. I reached into my pocket, pulled out the keys to the Range Rover I had bought for his birthday, and hit the unlock button. We were done the moment I died. I muttered to myself, opening the door. I climbed in, blasted the heat, and drove away, leaving them stranded in the snow. The drive back to the city took 40 minutes. I spent the first 20 in complete silence, gripping the steering wheel so tightly, my knuckles turned white, just feeling the vibrations of the road. I was alive. The heater blasted hot air against my frozen face. I rolled my shoulders. No stiffness, no IV lines pulling at the veins in the back of my hands. I was 26 again. I had my health, my money, and my mind. By the time I hit the city limits, my phone had buzzed 16 times. Declan. I ignored the calls, tossing the phone onto the passenger seat. He was probably stranded. He had ridden out to the lake with me. Fiona had taken an Uber under the guise of meeting us there by coincidence. It was a 15-mile walk back to town, and cell reception out by Lake Mercer was notoriously garbage. Good. Let him walk, let him freeze. I pulled up to the luxury high-rise apartment we shared in the financial district. I shared. My name was on the lease. My grandfather's trust paid the rent. I took the elevator up to the penthouse. The moment the heavy oak door clicked shut behind me, I moved with military efficiency. I didn't pack everything. I packed what mattered. I grabbed 2 large leather duffel bags from the closet. Into the first went my documents, my jewelry, my laptops, and the hard drives containing the intellectual property for my grandfather's logistics software. Into the second bag went the reality of Declan's life. Declan liked to play the self-made tech entrepreneur. It was a great story for the venture capitalists. The truth was, his entire startup was heavily subsidized by me. I pulled open his desk drawer and took out the ledgers. I took the joint credit cards I had issued him. I logged into my banking app on my phone and systematically transferred every cent of my liquid assets out of our shared accounts and into a private single-signer account. I watched the balance on the joint account drop from $450,000 to $0. My phone rang again. It was the building's concierge. Ms. Hayes, the concierge said politely. Mr. Vance is down here. He says he lost his key fob and needs to be let up. Declan had made it back. He must have finally caught a signal and ordered a car. "Cancel his access, please, Thomas," I said, my voice steady, as I zipped up the second duffel bag. There was a slight pause on the line. "Cancel his access, ma'am. Completely. Completely. He doesn't live here anymore. If he tries to force his way into the elevator, call security. If he refuses to leave the lobby, call the police. Understood, Ms. Hayes." I hung up. 2 minutes later, my cell phone started vibrating violently across the kitchen island. Declan's name flashed on the screen. I answered it, putting it on speaker, as I poured myself a glass of water. Cold water, because I could drink it now without triggering a coughing fit. "Nora, what the absolute hell is going on?" Declan's voice echoed through the kitchen, breathless and furious. "Thomas is telling me I'm barred from the elevators. Are you having a mental breakdown? You leave me at the lake. You talk a bunch of paranoid nonsense about me and Fiona, and now you're locking me out of my own apartment." "My apartment," I corrected, leaning against the marble counter. "Are you serious right now? You're throwing a tantrum over a misunderstanding. I don't know what you think you know about Fiona, but you are out of your mind." He was still trying to gaslight me. Even now, standing in a lobby he couldn't access, he thought he could bully me back into submission. In my past life, this tone would have terrified me. I would have folded, apologized, and let him back in desperate to keep the peace. "Declan," I said, quietly. Something in my tone must have registered, because he stopped ranting. "I know about the hotel room in Aspen," I said, keeping my voice perfectly level. "I know about the wire transfers you made to her brother's shell company. I know about the apartment you're renting for her in the Pearl District, using the corporate card I co-signed." Dead silence on the other end. The heavy, suffocating silence of a man who suddenly realizes the ground beneath him has disappeared. "Nora," he started, his voice dropping an octave, the anger instantly replaced by panic. "Nora, baby, listen to me. Someone is feeding you lies. Let me come up. Let's talk about this face to face. Your corporate card is declined." I continued, ignoring him. "The joint accounts are frozen. The lease on this apartment is being terminated tomorrow. I'm leaving your clothes in garbage bags with Thomas. Have a nice life, Declan. Don't call me again." I hung up. I blocked his number. I stood in the quiet of the apartment, the afternoon sun casting long shadows across the hardwood floor. My chest felt tight, but not from illness. It was adrenaline. It was anger. It was the intoxicating, terrifying freedom of being dead and coming back to life. By Monday morning, the narrative had already been spun. Declan was nothing if not a master of public relations. He spent the weekend crashing on his friend's sofa, frantically doing damage control, before I could get my side of the story out. By the time I walked into the sleek, glass-walled conference room at Hayes Logistics, the whispers had already started. Nora Hayes had lost her mind. Nora Hayes was having a paranoid breakdown. Nora Hayes had abandoned her loving fiancé in the freezing cold over a delusion. I didn't care. Let them talk. Gossip doesn't pay the bills. I sat at the head of the long mahogany table, nursing a black coffee. Today was the quarterly review for the tech incubator my grandfather's company sponsored. Declan's startup, Apex Solutions, was the crown jewel of that incubator. He was scheduled to pitch for his Series B funding at 10 a.m. At 9:55 a.m., the double doors swung open. Declan walked in wearing a sharp navy suit. He looked tired, but he forced a confident, charismatic smile for the board members already seated around the table. And right behind him, carrying a stack of leather-bound folders, was Fiona, She was officially his executive assistant. I had hired her for him a favor to a friend of a friend. Another cruel joke from my past life. She wore a tailored pencil skirt and a silk blouse, looking the part of the dedicated professional. Declan stopped dead when he saw me sitting in the chairman's seat. Usually my uncle handled these meetings. I never attended. I had spent the last 2 years staying out of the corporate side, playing the quiet, supportive fiancé. Nora. Declan said, his fake smile faltering for a fraction of a second. What are you doing here? I'm the majority shareholder, Declan, I said, leaning back in my leather chair. I decided it was time I took a more active interest in my investments. Go ahead, sit down, pitch. The older board members, men in their 60s, who had worked with my grandfather, exchanged uncomfortable glances. They knew we were engaged. They didn't know I had dumped his clothes in the lobby on Friday. Declan swallowed hard. He looked at Fiona, who suddenly looked very small, clutching her folders. He cleared his throat and walked to the front of the room, plugging his laptop into the projector. For 20 minutes, he talked. He was good at talking. He spoke about growth metrics, user acquisition, and disruptive synergies. He painted a picture of a company on the verge of a billion-dollar valuation, needing just one more injection of $5 million to scale globally. When he finished, he clicked the remote, bringing up a slide titled, "The Future with Hayes Logistics. We are asking the board for $5 million in Series B." Declan concluded, flashing his trademark smile at the older men. With this capital, we can double our workforce and expand into the European market by Q3. He looked at me. It was a challenge. He thought I wouldn't dare embarrass him in front of my family's board. He thought I was still the quiet girl who hated conflict. $5 million, I repeated, tapping my pen against the mahogany table. The sound echoed in the quiet room. Tell me, Declan, does that $5 million account for the missing $300,000 from Q1? The room went dead silent. Declan's smile vanished. I'm not sure what you mean, Nora. All our financials are in the packets Fiona handed out. I read the packets, I said, opening the folder in front of me. They're very colorful, but they don't match the internal audit I ran over the weekend. Specifically, the vendor payments to a firm called Crescent Consulting. Fiona dropped her pen. It clattered loudly onto the floor. She didn't bend down to pick it up. Crescent Consulting is a vital strategic partner, Declan said, his voice tightening. He gripped the edges of the podium. They handle our overseas server maintenance. SAR, Crescent Consulting. I read from a printed sheet. Is an LLC registered in Delaware 3 months ago. The registered agent is a Mr. Thomas Miller. I looked up, locking eyes with Fiona. Her face was chalk white. Who, coincidentally, is your executive assistant's brother, a 22-year-old barista who knows nothing about server maintenance. One of the senior board members, a bulldog of a man named Harrison, leaned forward, his brows furrowing. Declan, is this true? It's a misunderstanding. Declan stammered, sweat breaking out on his forehead. The funds were reallocated for necessary operational expenses. It's all perfectly legal. I can explain the structural hierarchy. You embezzled $300,000 of my family's money to fund a fake company run by your mistress's brother. I interrupted, my voice slicing through his corporate jargon like a scalpel. The word mistress hit the room like a bomb. Harrison gasped. 2 other board members recoiled. Nora, that is slander, Declan shouted, slamming his hand on the podium. His face was flushed red with panic and rage. You can't just come in here and make these insane accusations because we had a fight. It's not an accusation. It's a paper trail, I said, sliding a stack of bank statements down the table toward Harrison. I froze the corporate cards on Friday. I spent Saturday with forensic accountants. Not only is Hayes Logistics declining the Series B funding, but we are officially pulling our initial seed investment. You can't do that, Declan yelled, stepping away from the podium. We have a contract. Check Section 4, Clause B, I said coldly. Breach of fiduciary duty, resulting in gross financial misconduct, allows the primary investor to dissolve the partnership and liquidate assets to recoup losses. As of right now, Apex Solutions doesn't exist. You have no money. You have no servers. And by the time my lawyers are done with you, you won't even have the suit you're wearing. I stood up. I didn't look at Declan anymore. I looked at Fiona. She was staring at Declan in absolute horror, realizing that the golden goose was dead. You should probably start looking for a new job, Fiona, I said quietly, though I wouldn't use Declan as a reference. I walked out of the conference room, leaving them to the wolves. For the first time in 3 years, I took a deep breath, and the air tasted sweet. The executive elevator dropped 30 floors in absolute silence. I watched the digital display tick down the polished steel doors, reflecting a woman I barely recognized. My posture was straight. My shoulders were down. I wasn't shrinking into my coat to take up less space. When the doors chimed and slid open to the subterranean parking garage, the damp smell of concrete and exhaust hit me. It was a familiar smell, but today it felt sharp, real. Nora, the voice, echoed sharply off the low concrete ceiling. I didn't flinch. I kept walking toward my reserved space, the heels of my boots clicking a steady rhythm on the pavement. Declan stepped out from behind a concrete pillar, blocking the path to my car. His suit jacket was unbuttoned, his tie wrenched sideways. The polished, charismatic tech bro from the boardroom was gone. In his place stood a man whose entire manufactured reality was currently burning to ash. "Move, Declan," I said. "No." He planted his feet, holding his hands up, as if trying to calm a spooked animal. The condescension was back fighting a losing battle against his panic. "You are not walking away from this. You are going to go back upstairs. You are going to tell the board that you made a mistake, and you are going to unfreeze those accounts." Or what? I stopped, 3 feet away from him. I didn't reach for my keys. I just looked at him. "Or I'll ruin you," he hissed, dropping the placating hands. His fists clenched at his sides. "Do you think I don't have leverage? You think you can just snap your fingers and erase 3 years of my life? I built Apex. Me. You just signed the checks. And then you forged my signature to write checks to your girlfriend's brother." I replied, "That's called felony fraud, Declan. It carries a mandatory minimum in this state. If I were you, I'd be less worried about ruining me, and more worried about finding a defense attorney who accepts payment in cubic zirconia." His face flushed a dark, ugly red. The vein in his forehead bulged. For a split second, I saw the violence in him. It was the same latent, simmering violence that had allowed him to watch me crawl onto black ice just a few days ago. In my past life, that look would have sent me into a spiral of apologies. He took a sudden, aggressive step forward. I didn't back up. I didn't blink. I reached into my coat pocket and pulled out my phone. The screen, already lit up with an active call. "See, security," I said clearly into the receiver. Mr. Vance has bypassed the lobby and is currently harassing me in the executive garage, level B. Send a detail down immediately. Declan froze, his eyes darting to the phone, the bravado shattered. You're a psycho. He spat his voice, dropping to a harsh whisper. You're actually insane. This is about Fiona, isn't it? You're destroying my company because you're jealous. You're a pathetic, bitter trust fund brat who can't handle the fact that I don't love you. I don't care who you love. I said, my voice completely devoid of emotion. And it was true. The realization settled in my chest like a heavy, solid stone. I care that you stole from my family. I care that you thought I was stupid enough to let you get away with it. The sound of heavy boots echoing down the ramp signaled the arrival of building security. 2 large men in uniform rounded the corner, their radios crackling. Ms. Hayes, the lead guard, said, placing a heavy hand on his duty belt. Is there a problem here? No problem, Davis, I said, stepping around Declan and pressing the unlock button on my fob. Mr. Vance was just leaving. Escort him off the property. If he sets foot within 50 yards of this building, again, call the police and press trespassing charges. I opened my car door. I didn't look back as Davis gripped Declan by the bicep. You're going to regret this. Nora? Declan yelled, his voice cracking as the guards physically turned him away. You hear me. You're going to pay for this. I shut the door, cutting off his voice. The leather seat was cold. I started the engine, gripping the steering wheel. My hands were perfectly steady. As I drove up the ramp and merged into the gray afternoon traffic, my phone vibrated in the cup holder. A text message from an unknown number. Nora, please, it's Fiona. Declan is going crazy. I didn't know about the embezzlement, I swear. He told me it was a legitimate bonus. Please don't drag me into the lawsuit. I'll tell you whatever you want to know. I read the message at a red light. I let out a dry, humorless breath. The rats were already turning on each other. I deleted the text and blocked the number. Rain lashed against the floor-to-ceiling windows of Gideon Shaw's office. Gideon was my grandfather's lawyer, a ruthless, pragmatic man in his late 50s who viewed litigation not as a profession, but as a blood sport. They filed a countersuit this morning. Gideon said, not looking up from the thick manila folder on his desk. He adjusted his reading glasses. Breach of verbal contract, wrongful termination, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. He's asking for $10 million in damages. I took a sip of the black tea his paralegal had poured me. It was bitter. Does he have a case? He has a prayer. Gideon snorted, tossing the document onto his desk. And a very cheap lawyer. They're arguing that the $300,000 you transferred out of the joint accounts over the weekend was a co-mingled asset. He claims the funds funneled to Crescent Consulting were approved verbally by you during a private dinner 6 months ago. I was in Tokyo 6 months ago. I know. Gideon finally looked up, a sharp, predatory smile playing on his lips. Which is why I already submitted your passport stamps and flight manifests in our motion to dismiss. He's grasping at straws, Nora. But desperate men do stupid things. We need to be prepared for this to get ugly. I set my teacup down. The porcelain clinked sharply against the saucer. I want it ugly, Gideon. I don't want a settlement. I don't want a quiet NDA. I want him dismantled. Gideon leaned back in his leather chair, steepling his fingers. He studied me for a long moment. Your grandfather used to get that exact look in his eye when someone tried to short his stock. You've changed, Nora. Last week, You were calling me to draft a prenup that gave him half your trust. I woke up, I said, simply. It was the truest thing I could say. Good. Gideon opened another folder, because the forensic accountants found something else. The embezzlement to his mistress's brother is just the surface. He's been using Apex Solutions hardware servers you paid for to host unregulated offshore gambling sites. He's been skimming the transaction fees. The breath caught in my throat. I stared at Gideon. Gambling sites? Highly illegal ones. Gideon confirmed, sliding a spreadsheet across the desk. Based out of Macau. If the feds look into Apex, they won't just hit him with fraud. They'll hit him with money laundering. That carries federal prison time. I looked down at the rows of IP addresses and transaction logs. In my past life, I had died over a fake ring on a frozen lake, blind to the fact that the man I loved was operating a criminal enterprise out of our guest bedroom. The sheer scale of his deception made me nauseous. Does he know we know? I asked, my voice tight. Not yet, Gideon said. I recommend we hand this specific file over to the FBI anonymously. Let them execute a raid. It removes you from the blast radius and guarantees he never works in tech again. No, I shook my head, my mind racing. Not anonymously. If we do it anonymously, he'll spin a narrative. He'll claim he was hacked. He'll play the victim to the press, say a rival framed him. I want my name on the tip. I want Hayes Logistics to officially distance itself and burn him to the ground in broad daylight. Gideon's eyebrows raised. That will drag your company's name into the headlines. Hayes Logistics funds illegal gambling ring. The PR will be a nightmare for a quarter or two. We'll survive, I said, thinking of the sterile hospital room, the sound of the flatline. If we hide, we look complicit. If we strike first, we look like responsible corporate citizens cleaning house. Draft the brief. Send it to the district attorney and the FBI by 5 o'clock today. Gideon smiled. It was a terrifying expression. Consider it done. When I left Gideon's office, the rain had stopped leaving. The city streets slick and reflective. I walked the 4 blocks back to my apartment. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I checked the screen. It was a notification from LinkedIn. Declan had just published a long-form post. I stopped on the sidewalk and read it. It was a masterclass in manipulation. He didn't mention the fraud. He didn't mention Fiona. Instead, he wrote a sprawling emotional essay about toxic corporate culture and investors who leverage personal relationships to crush visionary founders. He painted himself as a martyr, ousted from his own company by a vindictive, unstable heiress who couldn't handle the pressure of innovation. The post already had 4,000 likes. Dozens of comments from other tech founders were pouring in, offering him support, calling me a parasite. I locked my phone and slipped it back into my pocket. Let them like his post. By Friday, the FBI would be kicking down his door. The annual Hayes Logistics Winter Gala was a mandatory affair. Held at the St. Regis, it was a gaudy, ostentatious display of wealth, disguised as a charity fundraiser for clean water initiatives. In my past life, I had dreaded this night. I used to hide in the corners, agonizing over my dress, terrified of saying the wrong thing to the wrong senator, while Declan worked the room, soaking up the attention. Tonight, I wore a backless emerald green silk gown that moved like liquid glass. I wore my grandfather's vintage Cartier necklace. I didn't hide. I stood by the grand staircase, a glass of sparkling water in hand, greeting every board member, politician, and rival CEO who walked through the doors. The ballroom was a sea of black tuxedos and glittering jewelry. Giant ice sculptures of ships and globes anchored the buffet tables. The irony wasn't lost on me. I stared at the carved ice, remembering the cracking sound of Lake Mercer. "You look stunning, Nora." I turned. Harrison, the Bulldog board member from the Monday meeting, stood there with a crystal tumbler of scotch. "Thank you, Harrison," I said. He took a sip, his eyes scanning the crowd. "The board is nervous. The FBI raided the Apex offices yesterday morning. They carried out 12 boxes of hard drives and seized the servers." "I know," I said. "I gave them the access codes." Harrison choked slightly on his scotch. He coughed, looking at me with a mix of horror and profound respect. "You didn't. I did. We're cutting out a cancer, Harrison. By Monday, the press will know Declan was laundering money for offshore casinos. Hayes Logistics will be praised for our aggressive internal auditing and our cooperation with federal authorities." Before Harrison could respond, a sudden commotion at the ballroom entrance drew our attention. The string quartet's music was drowned out by the sound of a raised, slurred voice. Declan. He had bypassed security, likely using a connection from one of his sympathetic tech bro friends who had an invitation. He looked awful. His suit was wrinkled, his hair was unkempt, and he smelled strongly of stale whiskey, even from 20 feet away. The crowd parted around him like water around a rock. People stared, murmuring behind their hands. He locked eyes with me across the room. He didn't look angry anymore. He looked unhinged. "Nora," he shouted, his voice echoing over the high, vaulted ceiling. I didn't move. I handed my water glass to a passing waiter. Harrison stepped forward instinctively, trying to shield me, but I put a hand on his arm, stopping him. "Let him come," I said quietly. Declan stumbled forward, ignoring the gasps of the socialites he bumped into. He stopped a few feet in front of me, swaying slightly. His eyes were bloodshot, ringed with deep, dark circles. "You called the feds," he slurred, pointing a shaking finger at me. "You actually did it. You destroyed my life." The ballroom had gone completely quiet. 300 of the city's most influential people were watching us. "You destroyed your own life, Declan." I said, my voice carrying clearly through the quiet room. "I just handed over the receipts." "I built that company," he screamed, spittle flying from his lips. "You were nothing but a bank account. You were a pathetic, clingy shadow. And I tolerated you. I tolerated your boring, suffocating presence because I needed the capital. And now, you think you can play God?" Whispers erupted around the room. A few security guards were fast walking toward us from the perimeter. "I don't think I'm God," I said, calmly, smoothing a non-existent wrinkle from my silk skirt. "I just think I'm the majority shareholder. And you are a thief. I'm a visionary." He roared, lunging forward. He never made it to me. Harrison grabbed his shoulder, and 2 security guards immediately tackled him to the marble floor. A table bumped, sending a stack of champagne flutes crashing to the ground, shattering like thin ice. Declan thrashed on the floor, his face pressed against the cold, marble, screaming obscenities. The polished veneer was completely gone. The brilliant tech founder was dead. All that remained was a desperate caught criminal throwing a tantrum. As the guards hauled him to his feet and dragged him toward the service elevators, he locked eyes with me one last time. "Fiona left me," he screamed, his voice breaking into a pathetic sob. "She took the cash from the apartment and left. You did this." I stood perfectly still, watching the doors close behind him, cutting off his wailing. The silence in the ballroom was deafening. Everyone was staring at me. They expected me to cry. They expected me to flee in embarrassment. I turned to the string quartet, who were standing frozen with their instruments. "Please," I said, my voice steady and clear. "Keep playing." I turned back to Harrison, who was staring at me as if he were seeing me for the very first time. I offered him a polite, perfectly practiced smile. "Now," I said, as the first tentative notes of a cello filled the room again. Where were we discussing the Q3 expansion? The federal building downtown smelled like stale coffee and floor wax. It was a sterile, uncompromising scent, completely devoid of the perfume and expensive scotch that had saturated the gala just 3 days prior. I sat in a hard plastic chair in an interrogation room, watching a digital clock on the wall blink in red, blocky numbers. 10:14 a.m. Agent Brooks sat across from me. He was a man in his late 40s, with tired eyes, and a tie that looked like it hadn't been unknotted since the late 90s. He slid a thick manila envelope across the metal table. "We appreciate your cooperation, Ms. Hayes," Brooks said. His voice was a low, gravelly monotone that suggested he had spent decades sifting through the wreckage of other people's bad decisions. "The financial records your legal team provided were comprehensive, to say the least. I assume you found the Macau accounts," I said, not touching the envelope. "We found the Macau accounts. We found the cryptocurrency ledgers. We even found the burner phones he was keeping in a lockbox at a private storage facility under a pseudonym." Brooks leaned back, crossing his arms over his chest. Declan wasn't just skimming off his company's servers. He was acting as a primary laundering node for a mid-sized sports betting syndicate operating out of Southeast Asia. He was moving nearly $2 million a month. I felt a cold prickle at the base of my neck. $2 million a month. While he was sleeping next to me, complaining about the cost of our grocery bills, he was moving millions in illicit funds. In my past life, if I hadn't died on that ice, what would have happened? Would the FBI have raided our apartment? Would I have been dragged out in handcuffs, an unwitting accomplice to a federal crime? The realization didn't make me angry. It made me incredibly, profoundly tired. "Has he confessed?" I asked. Brooks let out a dry, humorless exhale. "Oh, he's talking. He hasn't stopped talking since we picked him up from the precinct, after his little stunt at your gala. But he isn't confessing. He's deflecting." Brooks reached over and tapped a button on a small audio recorder, resting near the edge of the table. Static crackled, followed by the sound of a throat clearing. Then Declan's voice filled the small room. "You don't understand. You have to look at her accounts. Nora set this up. She's the majority shareholder. She controls the board. She funded the servers. She found out I was leaving her for someone else, and she fabricated this entire paper trail to frame me. She's a vindictive, psychotic bitch. Check her trust fund. Check her grandfather's ties to overseas shipping. She's the one you want, not me." Brooks clicked the recorder off. The silence that followed was heavy. "He's terrified," I observed quietly. "He's looking at 20 years minimum, Miss Hayes. Desperation makes liars out of most men." Brooks studied my face carefully, looking for a crack, a flinch, any sign of guilt or lingering affection. "But here's the thing. We did check your accounts. We ran a full audit on Hayes Logistics, dating back 5 years. Your grandfather ran a tight ship. And your personal accounts are spotless. The only anomaly is the $300,000 you pulled back last Friday, which was my money to begin with," I reminded him. Which was your money? Brooks agreed with a nod. Declan's defense attorney is trying to argue that because you co-signed the corporate card, you are liable for the transactions made to his mistress's brother. But the digital footprint on the approvals traces back to his IP address, his laptop, and his private login credentials. He forged your digital signature. I looked at the metal table, tracing a scratch in the surface with my fingernail. What happens now? Now we build the indictment. He's being held without bail as a flight risk. The syndicate he was working for isn't known for their forgiving nature when a node gets compromised. Frankly, he's safer in federal custody. Brooks leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table. But there is one loose end, Ms. Hayes. And I think you know what it is. Fiona. Brooks nodded. Fiona Miller. She was listed as an executive assistant, but our tech guys found a series of encrypted emails between her and the Macau contacts. She wasn't just a mistress. She was the liaison. She facilitated the communication between Declan and the syndicate. And right now, she's a ghost. I thought of the panicked text message she had sent me after I fired Declan in the garage. I didn't know about the embezzlement, I swear. A lie. Another pathetic, transparent lie. She knew everything. She was likely the one who introduced him to the operation. She emptied Declan's personal accounts before she vanished. Brooks continued. Took roughly $40,000 in cash, abandoned her apartment, and dropped off the grid. If she crosses an international border, getting her back will be a jurisdictional nightmare. She won't cross an international border, I said, my voice flat. Brooks raised an eyebrow. You sound very sure of that. Fiona likes comfort. She likes luxury. She doesn't have the stomach to flee to a non-extradition country and live out of a backpack. I stood up, smoothing the wrinkles from my wool trousers. She'll try to hide in plain sight. Probably a mid-tier domestic city, where she thinks she can lay low until she figures out how to access the offshore crypto wallets. If you hear from her, Brooks said, standing up with me, or if you have any idea where she might be, you need to call us immediately. Do not attempt to engage her. She's desperate, and desperate people are dangerous. I'll keep that in mind, Agent Brooks, I said politely. I walked out of the federal building and into the crisp morning air. The city was bustling, indifferent to the lives being dismantled in the interrogation rooms above. I pulled my phone from my purse and dialed a number I had memorized, but rarely used. It rang twice before a gruff voice answered. Callahan. David Callahan was a private investigator on retainer for Hayes Logistics. He usually handled corporate espionage, tracking down stolen patents, or investigating executives who breached their non-competes. David, it's Nora Hayes. Miss Hayes. I saw the news about the raid. Hell of a week you're having. It's about to get busier, I said, stepping into the back of my waiting town car. I need you to find someone. Fiona Miller, she's running. The feds are probably already looking for her, Ms. Hayes. I don't want to step on government toes. The feds move slow. They need subpoenas for traffic cameras and warrants for bank records. You don't. I watched the city blur past the tinted window. She took $40,000 in cash. She won't use credit cards, but she's addicted to her phone. Track her MAC address. Track her brother's social media. Find out where she is. And when I find her, Callahan asked, don't touch her. Just send me the address. It took Callahan exactly 48 hours. Fiona hadn't fled to Mexico or the Caribbean. She had taken a Greyhound bus to Chicago, paying in cash, and checked into a rundown motor inn near Midway Airport, under her mother's maiden name. It was exactly the kind of pathetic, short-sighted move I expected from her. I didn't tell Agent Brooks. Not yet. I took the company jet to Chicago on a Thursday evening. The sky was the color of bruised, iron-threatening snow. The rental car took me through miles of gray industrial sprawl until I pulled into the flickering neon glow of the Starlight Motel. It was a bleak, depressing place. The asphalt was cracked and weeds pushed through the concrete walkways. Room 114 was at the back, facing a chain-link fence that separated the property from a noisy highway overpass. I stood outside her door. The wind howled, biting through my cashmere coat. I didn't feel the cold. I raised my fist and knocked. 3 sharp raps. Silence. Then the faint rustling of fabric. The peephole darkened as someone looked through. I heard a sharp, panicked intake of breath from the other side of the cheap wooden door. A lock clicked, then a deadbolt. She wasn't going to open it. "Fiona," I said, my voice carrying clearly through the thin wood. "I know you're in there. I have 2 men sitting in a black SUV at the entrance of the parking lot. You can open the door and talk to me, or I can text Agent Brooks the address right now, and you can talk to the FBI tactical team that will be here in 20 minutes. 10 agonizing seconds passed. The highway traffic roared overhead. The deadbolt slid back. The door cracked open, chained from the inside. Fiona's face appeared in the gap. She looked ruined. The perfectly styled hair was greasy and pulled into a messy knot. Her designer makeup was gone, revealing dark, sunken bags under her eyes. She wore an oversized gray hoodie that looked like it belonged to Declan. "What do you want, Nora?" she whispered, her voice trembling. "Open the door, Fiona." She hesitated, her eyes darting past me to the dark parking lot, looking for the phantom SUV I had invented. Trembling, she shut the door, unhooked the chain, and pulled it wide open. I stepped inside. The room smelled of stale cigarette smoke and cheap bleach. A single suitcase lay open on the unmade bed, spilling clothes and crumpled $100 bills. A half-eaten container of takeout rested on a cheap laminate nightstand. I didn't take off my coat. I stood in the center of the room, looking at her. "How did you find me?" she asked, wrapping her arms around her waist. She was shivering. "You logged into your burner email using the motel's public Wi-Fi," I said smoothly. It was a lie, but she wasn't smart enough to know the difference. "You're sloppy, Fiona. You and Declan both." At the sound of his name, a flash of pure hatred crossed her face. "Don't group me in with him. He's a monster. He dragged me into this." "Stop!" The command cracked like a whip. She flinched, her mouth snapping shut. "Do not play the victim with me. I spent 3 years playing the victim. I know what it looks like. You aren't a victim. You're a parasite who finally killed the host." Fiona's eyes welled with tears. The doe-eyed routine. The same routine she used on the edge of the icy lake. "Nora, please," she begged, taking a step toward me. I didn't know how deep he was in. He told me it was just a few servers. He told me he was moving money for a legitimate venture capitalist in Hong Kong. By the time I realized it was a syndicate, they threatened my brother. They said if I didn't keep passing the messages, they would kill Thomas. "Is that why you slept with my fiancé?" I asked. My voice was dangerously quiet. "Did the syndicate force you into a hotel room in Aspen? Did they force you to stand on the shore of Lake Mercer and watch him try to send me onto black ice for a fake ring?" Fiona froze. The tears stopped falling. Her expression shifted from panicked desperation to a cold, calculating fear. She realized in that moment that I wasn't here about the money. You knew, she breathed, her eyes widening. You knew about the ring. I knew about all of it, I said. I know that while I was crawling onto that ice, you were standing there with the real ring in your pocket, waiting for me to fall in so you could have a laugh about the pathetic, desperate heiress. He told me to, she cried, her voice rising to a hysterical pitch. He said he wanted to prove to me how pathetic you were. He said you would do anything he asked because you were weak. The words should have hurt. In a different life, they would have shattered me. Now, they just felt like an echo in an empty room. He was right, I said softly. I was weak, but I'm not anymore. I walked over to the bed. I looked down at the open suitcase, at the stacks of cash she had drained from Declan's accounts. You have $40,000 here, I said. The federal government is going to seize it as evidence of criminal proceeds. You have a burner phone with Macau contacts on it. The syndicate knows Declan was arrested. They know you're running. How long do you think it will take before they find this motel? Fiona let out a choked sob, sinking to her knees on the stained carpet. Please, Nora, please don't call the FBI. Just let me take the money and go. I swear you will never see me again. I'll disappear. I looked down at her. This was the woman who had smiled at me in the hospital, pretending to cry while my lungs failed. This was the woman who kissed the man I loved while I was suffocating on my own blood. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. I'm not going to call the FBI, Fiona, I said, dialing a number and putting it on speaker. She looked up, a glimmer of hope breaking through her terror. You won't? No, I replied as the line connected. Agent Brooks, it's Nora Hayes. Fiona screamed. She lunged forward, trying to grab the phone from my hand. I stepped back smoothly, letting her crash onto the floor. Ms. Hayes. Brooks' gruff voice came through the speaker. Tell me you have something. I do. I'm standing in room 114 of the Starlight Motel near Midway Airport in Chicago. Fiona Miller is here. She has a suitcase full of stolen cash and the burner phones you're looking for. Do not let her leave. Brooks barked, his voice suddenly sharp. I'm routing this to the Chicago field office right now. We'll have units there in 10 minutes. Step out of the room, Miss Hayes. Secure the door from the outside. I will. Thank you, Agent. I hung up. Fiona was curled on the floor, sobbing hysterically, pulling at her own hair. You bitch. You vindictive, evil bitch. Get your coat, I said coldly, turning toward the door. It's freezing outside, and unlike you, I wouldn't want anyone to catch pneumonia. I stepped out of the room. I closed the door behind me and leaned against the cold brick wall of the motel. I didn't lock her in. I didn't have to. She was broken. She knew if she ran now, the police would catch her on the highway. 10 minutes later, the wail of sirens pierced the roar of the overpass. 3 black cruisers and an unmarked sedan swerved into the motel parking lot, their red and blue lights painting the cracked asphalt in violent strobing colors. I watched as armed federal agents kicked the door to room 114 open. I watched them drag Fiona out in handcuffs, her face stained with tears, screaming my name. I watched them load her into the back of a cruiser like an animal. I didn't feel joy. I didn't feel triumphant. I just felt clean. The rot was finally gone. Spring came to the city slowly, a gradual softening of the brutal winter cold. The snow turned to slush, then to rain, and finally to bright, crisp mornings, where the sun actually felt warm against the skin. A lot can change in 6 months. Hayes Logistics didn't just survive the scandal. We capitalized on it. The narrative the PR firm spun was flawless an established legacy company, rooting out bad actors and modernizing its oversight. The board, terrified of my ruthless efficiency, after seeing me dismantle my own fiancé, gave me unilateral control over the tech incubator. I fired the dead weight, promoted the engineers who actually did the work, and doubled our profit margins by Q2. And Declan, his sentencing hearing was on a Tuesday in early May. I sat in the back row of the federal courtroom. The room was packed with reporters, investors he had defrauded, and curious onlookers. He sat at the defense table wearing a cheap, ill-fitting gray suit, provided by his public defender. All his assets had been frozen or seized to pay restitution. When the judge asked him to stand, he looked like a hollow shell of a man. The arrogant posture was gone. His hair was thinning his skin, a sickly, pale color, from months in county lockup. He didn't look at the gallery. He just stared at the wooden table. Declan Vance, the judge's voice, boomed over the microphone. You have been found guilty on 2 counts of wire fraud, 1 count of conspiracy to commit money laundering, and 1 count of operating an unlicensed money-transmitting business. The scope of your deception was vast, and your lack of remorse during these proceedings has been noted. The judge paused, shuffling a stack of papers. I sentence you to a term of 180 months in federal prison without the possibility of early parole. 15 years. A collective gasp rippled through the courtroom. Declan's knees buckled. His public defender had to catch him by the arm to keep him from collapsing completely. The bailiffs moved in immediately, clamping handcuffs onto his wrists. As they turned him around to lead him toward the holding cells, his eyes scanned the crowd and found me in the back row. He stopped. The bailiff tugged his arm, but he resisted for a fraction of a second, just long enough to stare at me. There was no hatred left in his eyes. There was only a profound, bottomless despair. He finally understood the gravity of what he had thrown away. He had traded a lifetime of security wealth and a woman who would have died for him for a cheap thrill and a few $1,000,000 that he could never even spend. I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. I just held his gaze until the bailiff shoved him through the heavy wooden doors, removing him from my life forever. I walked out of the courthouse and into the bright May sunlight. My phone buzzed. It was a message from Gideon Shaw, my lawyer. Sentencing confirmed. The chapter is closed. Nora, drink something expensive tonight. I typed back a quick reply. I'm driving out of the city for the afternoon. See you Monday. I got into my Range Rover. I didn't drive back to the penthouse, and I didn't drive to the office. I merged onto the highway, heading north. 40 minutes later, I parked on the gravel shoulder of a familiar dirt road, Lake Mercer. I stepped out of the car. The air smelled of damp earth and blooming pine. It was quiet, save for the chirping of birds and the gentle rustle of the wind through the trees. I walked down the muddy path toward the shoreline. The ice was gone. The lake was a deep, brilliant blue, reflecting the clear sky above. Small ripples lapped gently against the muddy bank. It looked peaceful. It looked entirely ordinary. I stood exactly where I had stood 6 months ago on that freezing December day. I looked out at the water, trying to superimpose the memory of the black ice over the gentle waves. I remembered the crushing weight of the cold. I remembered the water filling my mouth, the agonizing burn in my chest as I sank. I remembered the hospital room. I remembered dying. I placed a hand flat against the center of my chest. Beneath my cashmere sweater, I could feel the steady, rhythmic thumping of my heart. I took a breath. A deep, massive, unhindered breath. The air filled my lungs perfectly, expanding my ribs, feeding oxygen to every cell in my body. There was no wheeze. There was no pain. I was alive. The anger that had propelled me for the last 6 months, the burning need for vengeance, the icy detachment suddenly evaporated. It left me drifting out over the water like morning fog, burning off in the sun. I didn't need it anymore. Declan was in a cage. Fiona was awaiting trial in a federal detention center. The timeline had been righted. The karma had been delivered. I closed my eyes and let the warm spring wind wash over my face. I stood there for a long time, just listening to the water. When I finally opened my eyes, I didn't look back at the lake. I turned around, walked back up the hill to my car, and drove back toward the city. My life wasn't a second chance anymore. It was just my life. And for the first time since I woke up on the edge of the ice, I was finally ready to live it. Nora's second chance didn't just save her life. It dismantled the parasites who tried to end it. Declan traded a tech empire for a 15-year prison sentence, while Fiona learned the hard way that you can't outrun federal agents. But the absolute sweetest revenge wasn't the arrests or the seized assets, it was Nora standing by that lake, finally breathing free. Sometimes the only way to genuinely heal is to burn the rot to the ground. If this story of brutal, calculated karma satisfied your soul, hit that like button, share it with a friend, and subscribe to the channel for more gripping, unapologetic stories.